It's kind of funny. Like I almost kind of consider myself a real hardware purist, yet I'm developing an emulation project.
So I haven't done one of these things before. Some other fellow YouTubers are featuring other creators in the YouTube community for Retro January. Every single day, those of us that really appreciate old vintage hardware take advantage of the brain trust of everyday people. These people are making some of the coolest, most amazing things that really allow us to experience the systems that we never had before, or maybe the ones that we did have, but have gotten incredibly expensive over time. Today I'm going to do an interview and a little feature. The person is Ian Scott, and the feature is the PicoGUS, or the Gravis Ultrasound. This is a huge contribution to the retro community. Ian has gone above and beyond to recreate a card that's pretty much unobtainium. These cards are in production today, and if you never had a Gravis Ultrasound before, you can experience it the way that it was back in the mid-90s. Now, before we get going, I want you to listen to a track that really exemplifies what the GUS is capable of. Have a listen. So, what I hope will be the first of many for the Maker series, let's meet Ian Scott. Ian, welcome.
Cool.
How are you?
Yeah, great. I'm doing fine. It's great to be here with you. And when you asked me if I would be interested in talking with you, I was like, yeah, I'm game. I'd love to talk about retro stuff and making things. And I know you've worked a lot on stuff like with the 701C ThinkPads, and I followed your guides and watched your videos about it, and it's had me go down the path of resurrecting a ThinkPad that I bought off some guy on Facebook Marketplace, and it's actually working now. So when you reached out, and I know a while ago that I sent you a PicoGUS, and I recognized your name, so I sent you an email, and so here we are.
This is kind of how this started, is I bought one of your PicoGUSs. I put my name on a waiting list, and I think when it first came out, I just happened to be looking at my phone and I jumped on it. And then I get this package in the mail like a week or so later, and it's got this little note inside from you saying, hey, look, I love your 701C stuff. And I'm like, holy cow. Like it was honestly a little bit surprising to me that somebody that I didn't know in the space like recognized some of my work. Have you had the same? Have you had any surprises about people that were like, oh my God, Ian, that's you making this GUS?
Oh yeah, no, I've definitely been surprised by when people, like I'm just on some random like Discord server or something like that, and like they see my name or they click on my profile, which has like to my GitHub, and it's like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. I want to get one of those, and I'm just shocked that like anyone else has like not in the general public really, but kind of in the retro or just general computer enthusiast space has seen it, like outside of just me directly telling them about it, which is kind of just how I got started with the project and getting the word out for it.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, you don't really do any marketing. We, people who make these things, don't really do any marketing. It kind of gets spurred from, the communities. I remember when I first started posting about it on Reddit a long time ago, even before I started, thinking about doing a website.
Yeah.
Did you have that in mind at all when you were starting? How did you start this project? What was the genesis of the PicoGUS?
Yeah. So to go back almost 30 years, I was big into, on calling BBSs, downloading whatever I could as a kid or young teenager. And I was always interested in music. And when I found that you could download music via these tracker files, like artists would make, started on the Amiga, but then you could play them on your PC. I just gotten a sound blaster, and I found like, oh, you can look at all this free music you can get, because like that was unheard of. That was before MP3s existed, and I was like, this is amazing, because I was a kid, I could like go buy new music. And then I found out, a couple years later, it's like the Gravis Ultrasound is what you need. This is the best thing if you're on a PC. Gives you the best quality. And by then, I'd seen a few things like in the demo scene, coming up with, these demos and the amazing music people were making with them. And they said, you have to have a GUS. So I asked for one for Christmas, and amazingly, I got one. It's, in fact, you'll excuse me, it's here. This is the same GUS. I've had it ever since I was a kid. And I never got rid of it because I knew it was like something special. Like, this is a special piece of kit. And I hadn't had a PC you could actually work in for decades, but I still hold on to it, like moving from state to state, because I just knew this thing was so cool. So I never got rid of it. Fast forward, basically, the start of the pandemic, and everyone's got time on their hands, and a bunch of people get into retro computers again, and so do I pull this card out of a box. It's like, okay, I'm going to build a PC around this thing. I'm going to play all the games I did. I'm going to watch the demos and listen to the music that I listened to when I was a kid, and I got into it, and it didn't work. So I had to like buy surplus chips from China to make it work. And so I got the card working, and I had my system and stuff. And then I started, watching people on YouTube get into restoring old computers and all the things around them. And there's some people on Twitch that I follow that use old computers and, play games. Or there's this guy, DJ Hoffman. He's in the UK, and he streams himself either coding on the Amiga, or just doing DJ sets of old Amiga tunes, or real quote unquote real music. And a couple times he said, I wish I had a GUS. That would be really awesome, but like the price on them is ridiculous for the real thing. And a couple other people that I talked to, it's like, yeah, I'm so priced out of this, and I wish I had one. And I've always kind of been a maker a little bit. Like, I've tinkered around. Back in the day when I was a kid, I built a little sound card that plugged into the parallel port on your computer, or an LPT DAC, using a schematic that out of a text file that came with the mod player I used. So I've always kind of been, tinkering and making stuff. But this was when I don't know how I got the idea that it would even be possible to do it. But I thought, okay, well, DOSBox, the DOS emulator, has Gravis Ultrasound support. You can emulate a GUS inside DOSBox. It's open source. And I looked at its source, and it's like, oh, this is actually pretty modular. What if I ran this on a Raspberry Pi, and I had some kind of interface where you could plug it into an old computer, and it would act like a real GUS? Like, the software on the PC wouldn't know it was anything but the real thing. And so I went ahead, and I hadn't really ever really designed a PCB before, aside from some smaller projects a while ago. And I decided to come up with a design. It was really small, and I put on it really dumb prototype in the silk screen on it, because I knew it was just so dumb. There's no way this was going to work. This was the first prototype of. It's actually hooked up to this. This is a logic analyzer that I use to. So I plug this into the computer, and capture the ISA bus with my real GUS plugged into it to, do these recordings of, when the program starts, or when it's uploading samples to it, and try and figure out the timing of everything to see like how much time budget I have to react to these certain bus events. And so I actually went and I got an old copy. I had it in reach. I bring it up on the camera, of the old textbook that I used back in college, because I remembered this. And so it was actually kind of applicable, kind of amazingly. Like, my day job, I'm a software engineer, doing stuff on the web. But I don't done anything professional with hardware, and I've got some formal education in it. But I've only really dabbled in stuff. This was like the first time I've ever really just dove in, just all the way in, designing PCBs, hooking up logic analyzers, um, worrying about analog stuff with the audio portion on the card. Like this has been just a huge learning experience for me, and kind of trying to remember stuff I learned back in college, or just searching online for anyone else and finding other examples of people that have done some sort of similar things, that have been kind of an inspiration in terms of, like there's so many different retro projects now out there. Um, so yeah,
People are doing the same thing as you that had a need. And interesting enough, it was the same for you as my work, which you had something you wanted to use that was broken.
yeah,
And the first thing that you did was figure out how to
hmm
fix it. And then you're like, wait, more people might want
yeah,
this because it's a rarity or
yeah,
something like
exactly.
that. I'm curious to know because what was the name of the initial kind of silk screen you put on the PCB
Oh
again?
yeah, it said very dumb prototype because
Very
yeah,
dumb prototype.
is I don't know if
Yeah,
you probably can't see it. Yeah, it's called. I originally called it the PicoGUS because it plugged into. I think it's on that side. It's just very dumb. It's kind of hard to see. Uh, but yeah, plugged the original regular full size Raspberry Pi into it. That was my first idea. Yeah, that was like the meme with the dog. Just, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I'd heard, I think it was a tweet by Foon or something like that back, when I was on Twitter, about these different level shifter bus, like these chips that could convert from 5 volts down to 3 volts. And you really didn't really have to know anything about, you know, anything. They just worked. They were kind of magic, in terms of, needing to say which direction they're going in. They kind of automatically sense the direction you're setting the data in. So it was kind of perfect for me because I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I think, I'm still not like a real electrical engineer, so I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm learning a lot more every day. Um, but amazingly, when I put this together and I, hooked the logic analyzer up to it and the Raspberry Pi, like within like 2 weeks, I was getting sound out of it. I was getting like real sound, not just like, beeps and boops. It was real, like honest to goodness music. Like I had, I did not expect it to be, I wouldn't say easy, but like that straightforward. Like it was kind of shocking to me how, like, it's like, why hadn't someone done this before? Because I did it with without much preparation beforehand. So, but afterwards, I found a whole lot of other people that had done, other kind of things and hooking, old old computers up to more modern, microcontrollers and things like that. But I was kind of in the dark there. I was just off on my own, just experimenting and seeing what was possible.
how much it's interesting. A lot of what these projects are taking old, obsolete things and giving new life to them. Sometimes that means
Hmm.
finding not necessarily new old stock chips, but finding the actual chips that need to go on the
Hmm.
boards. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's emulation, whether it's software or hardware, in order to recreate some of this stuff. Like, how much I get this question quite a bit on my work. How much of it was
Yeah.
actually what you would consider reverse engineering, actually looking at the signals coming in and out of the actual board within the test
Hmm.
bench and replicating them in a way that is not with original hardware?
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think if I didn't have, the original working card, to look at and record with the logic analyzer, how it actually works on the bus, like if I had just gone by, the available documentation out there, it would not have been possible. It is a very well documented card, and there's probably 3 or 4 open source implementations of, how you send commands to it. But like how it actually acts on the computer bus when you're using it on a real PC, like that was stuff I had to reverse engineer. I had to figure out, in the real world, when you ask the ultrasound to raise an IRQ, like in what amount of time does that happen? What time in between like DMA events, like does stuff happen? And like I was kind of guessing until I actually, did these captures. And so I could see, okay, all right, well, this is happening, this is happening. And then also a lot of the books, like I literally like was buying old books on eBay on how to interface with the ISA bus, or finding like PDFs that people had scanned to the Internet Archive, for this stuff. It's pretty cool how much was actually available, but a lot of um, there was a lot of missing information in that. Like, for example, how DMA works, the timing of it, and every single timing diagram I've seen about DMA, it's a completely idealized version of how it's supposed to work. And it doesn't really work like that in the real world. And I didn't know about that until I actually looked at the signals, and it's like, oh, it's actually doing this. Like, this signal doesn't go high when it at the start of the transfer, it goes high at the end. And like, there isn't valid data on the bus until this moment happens. And it took a lot of trial and error, and figuring out how this stuff actually works in the real world versus what the idealized documentation actually says.
Was it tolerances that were unexpected, or was there actual parts of the protocol that were undocumented or just flat wrong in your experience?
um at least for the DMA, it was basically wrong. Yeah. Like, it says,
Yeah.
like, when I don't remember if it's DMA, like DAC, DMA acknowledge, when the computer, you raise the DMA request and the computer comes back, DMA acknowledge, you can now DMA. Every diagram I saw, it's like, when the computer comes back and says that with DMA acknowledge, the data on the data pins on the ISA bus, that's your data. And that's completely wrong. It is not the data. It's going to be like, maybe the upper 4 bits or the data, and the lower 4 bits or what's left over from what used to be the address, or it's some garbage. And it's not until this other signal, the IOW, goes high, that's when the data is actually valid. And none of the timing diagrams in any of the documentation I saw said that that was the case. Like, and it amazes me. Like, I'm imagining someone, back in the 80s or the early 90s developing these cards. They probably ran into the same thing. And like, I'm sure the tools they had weren't nearly as easy to get or easy to use, or they didn't have the old internet at their fingertips to figure out this stuff. Like, I benefit so much from 30 plus years of people figuring things out.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. When I was first working with, I guess you could call it a battery management IC for the 701C, it runs on what's called a one wire bus. Now,
Oh yeah.
the interesting part is the bus is pretty well documented and it's pretty straightforward protocol.
Mm-hmm.
But the most maddening thing for me is that I spent so long just unable to get anything to work at all, right? See any signal until I plugged in a logic analyzer, and I realized was IBM's implementation for this specific laptop, for this specific battery, didn't treat it as a bus. So the battery management on the motherboard assumed that there was no
Huh.
bus, that it was just directly communicating with the IC. So instead of all the normal commands you're expecting, like enumerating a bus, like,
Okay.
hey, who's there? What are you? All of that's lost. So I was waiting for all of these requests to come in, and they just never came
Mm-hmm.
because they just assume that that's the only thing and you should just start
Oh,
talking to it. And there's no documentation to it. Honestly, that is kind of common for IBM, is to use
yeah.
standards and then just completely rip them
Mm.
apart and make them their own. Did you did you see anything kind of similar in your time with the
Yeah.
Gus?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think also kind of the way that, like, the one downside to the Gus is, like, ultimately it was originally made as, a sample based music playback device. You had a megabyte of memory on it you could upload samples to, and then you could say, play this at this frequency, with this panning and volume. um, and it almost seemed like kind of like an afterthought for how to actually get like streaming audio to play on it. And so the way streaming audio is done on the Gus, it's a total hack. It's fortunately it's documented. But I could just see, like, back then, like, the game developers was like, this is terrible, and the card had bad support because of it, because it was such a pain to program for. But I had to work with this incomplete or this hacky way to get streaming audio to work in, and that was probably the hardest part of getting the emulation good enough for me to say, okay, I'm releasing this out to the world, everyone can use it. Um, so like before that, like you could play music in like a tracker, but you couldn't play Doom on it, and like 99% of people when they get old computer out, they're going to want to play Doom on it. So if it didn't play Doom, no one was going to want to use it.
That's good. That's probably the first game. Actually, I don't know. For the Gus,
Mm-hmm.
the Gus had some pretty iconic games, that were kind of
Yeah.
developed specifically for it. Back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
what were your favorites, or were you really focused on the kind of demo and tracker scene?
I honestly, I really was. I wasn't like, I've always played games. Like I think, um, but when I play games, I didn't play them on my Gus, because I found out pretty quickly, like most games I like playing like racing games. I like Need for Speed. I think the very first one. Like it didn't work on the Gus, so I had to go and buy a Sound Blaster. So I had a Sound Blaster and a Gus in the same computer. But there were a few games that I think worked really well with it. Like Epic Mega Games, now Epic Games, like they were really good about supporting it. Like all their games had first class support, like Jazz Jackrabbit, One Must Fall, 2097, Epic Pinball. Those games sounded so much better on the Gus. So like those were definitely games that I played on it, because I knew that was the much better experience. And I also like playing Doom on it, because I liked the MIDI soundtrack in Doom better versus like the FM synthesis. I think back then I felt like I was kind of like a snob. I was like, oh, FM's beneath me. I need wavetable synthesis. So like anything that supported MIDI, I wanted to make sure I got it working on my Gus. So um, like Descent had a good MIDI soundtrack that sounded really good on the Gus. So I played a lot of that also.
Yeah, no, that's great. I I won't ask you to do it to kind of list them out here, but I'm definitely going to add some links in the descriptions to kind of your favorite tracker files, so the people that you know
Okay.
can have yours or have a Gus can go experience those kind of the way that they're
Yeah.
intended to. Because I agree. Because the first thing that I did was when I got the Gus from you is I loaded up obviously Doom, but I loaded up Secret of Monkey Island, that has
Okay.
a
Yeah.
fantastic soundtrack in general, and I just love hearing it on the Gus. And Extreme Pinball was a must,
Yeah.
right? I loved that. And I've got this box back here. It's a Pentium 133. It's kind of the sweet spot for that period hardware.
Oh
And
yeah.
same thing, I've got an AW32 in there as well, and the Gus, just so
Uh,
that I can jump back and
yeah.
forth. But I loved the Extreme Pinball soundtrack. It was
Mhm.
iconic. But I will put some of your favorite links to the
Yeah.
tracker files in the description so that people can check those
Mhm.
out. I
Cool.
want to jump and talk a little bit about kind of making in general, right? Is this your first project, first big project? Would you consider yourself a tinkerer or
Mhm.
or a maker?
I think up until recently, I was a tinkerer. Like I would, get an old computer, and usually it wasn't working, so I tinker with it and I try and get it working. Or if something is broken around the house, I would fix it up. Um, like I've always had, a soldering iron or multimeter, at the ready to, you know, fix something up, or you know make a kit, for something, the blank LEDs, or, play with the Arduino, or, the GPIOs on a Raspberry Pi. Um, but there was never anything I really ever really made, from scratch. There have been a few things here and there. Like a friend of mine, um, he ran this kind of puzzle hunt event, back in the Bay Area, where you drive around and solve puzzles. And we made this device, that would had a GPS in it, and it was powered by an AVR microcontroller, and it would point to where the next puzzle was, tell you how far it was, and it was kind of ghost themes. So it looked like the meters in the movie Ghostbusters. Um, And so that was kind of like the only real kind of thing. And it wasn't just my thing because he mostly drove it and I was just kind of there to be there with him to help out. So this was really the first thing I like ever really considered myself like to be like, okay, I am making this. This is, this is kind of my passion to get this done and make it as good as I can and open up this thing that people hadn't been able to really experience because the original hardware is so rare. Um, so yeah, no, I think ultimately, yeah, like I think before I considered myself a tinkerer, and now I consider myself a maker for sure.
When you think about taking on a new project, clearly, I mean, you've already said that, you kind of gravitate towards things that are sound and audio based on computers. Do you ever do you ever think about things in the realm of wanting to learn something specific, a new skill? Does that enter into your thought process, or is it more kind of about what the project is, and then whatever skills are needed, you'll figure it out?
Yeah, I think I approach it more from the um, there's a problem, and I want to solve it, and I'll learn the skills that are needed to get there. Like for example, with the Gus, is like the problem is that these cards are unobtainium or they're expensive. So I want to emulate one, so I'm going to learn everything I need to get that done. So yeah, it's not approaching from the skill side. It's approaching it from this is something I want to do, so I'm just going to just dive in and learn everything I can to get to that point. And now that I've done that with stuff like on the ISA bus, it's like okay, I want to learn more stuff. Like so, I think like I want to learn a different type of bus to interface with and kind of transfer those kind of skills over. Like for example, on the X68K or who knows? Like there's all kinds of other stuff out there. Like I like the Commodore Amiga, but like things are pretty well set on the Amiga in terms of like there's like the PiStorm project, which is like fully replacing the CPU with a Raspberry Pi. Like those guys are way above my level. It's like, okay, you guys got this covered. I'm gonna like kind of look in the strange areas for like kind of what else is out there that I can, what else I can work on.
Yeah, I think that's probably why I gravitated towards the 701C,
Mm-hmm.
because it was rare and
Yeah,
they just broke all the time. You could never
yeah,
find one in new condition. The batteries were all bad, and that's
exactly.
why I definitely get that part. What about kind of a community?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a community that you either curated or fostered, or with other makers that you go to kind of bounce ideas off of? Are there forums that you frequent? Are there
Mm-hmm.
trade shows that you frequent?
Yeah.
What does that look like for you?
Yeah, like I think I mentioned this earlier. It's like when I was starting this, I was like on my own. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just kind of figuring stuff on my own. Um, and yeah, I just kind of was off on my own, but eventually I found other people that were interested in the same kind of thing. Um, like for example, like on Vogons, I started a thread on Vogons about the project. Pretty early on, back when it was on the Raspberry Pi instead of the Pico. Just saying, hey, here's what I'm doing. If anyone else is interested in, like, tell me what you think about it. And I had a bunch of people said, oh, why aren't you using an FPGA? An FPGA would be so much better. I reply is like, great, but I have no idea how to do that, and that's too much for me to learn right now. I'm just going to keep going down this path. If anyone wants to make an FPGA, go right ahead. I'm sure it'll be better than this, but actually, this is going pretty great right now. And then, like for example, a few people, started sending me DMs on Vogons. For example, Freddie V. He's started another Pico project based off of instead of on like the sound card aspect, it was kind of on like disk emulation and floppy disk and memory. Kind of another thing that's kind of sorely needed on kind of XT class machines, but you can use it on other more um, not modern. They're all old, but 386 or 46 era machines even. Um, so he started DMing me, and then we started talking back and forth. And another person, YYZ Kevin, or YYZ Kevin. He is really into laptops and ThinkPads, and he is big into networking, and he had always been thinking about creating like a modern wireless PCMCIA card that could join a modern Wi-Fi network with WPA2, and you can use your old PC 110 or 701C on a regular Wi-Fi. Um, and when he saw my project, he said, "Okay, oh great, I can make a PCMCA card with this." And he's gone ahead and done that. And so we started talking all together. Um, I started a Discord server for us to talk on, so we're all kind of together. And I've linked to it, for my blog, and I blog I blog once a year, kind of like, here's what I did this year on this project, because I don't have the time to really, or the patience to write more than once a year. So people found me on that, and back when I was on Twitter, I found people there, and I'm using Mastodon now. I found people there, and this past summer or past fall, I attended my first Vintage Computer Festival. I went to VCF Midwest, and that was amazing. That was an absolutely incredible experience. Like, just seeing what else other people have done, just hardware I've never seen in person. I've only seen pictures of. I met Kevin, who's working on the PCMCA project. He had a booth next to me, and so we got to talk, in detail, and I got to see what he's been working on. And a bunch of people came by my booth, and I started talking to them. Adrian Black of the Adrian's Digital Basement YouTube channel. He's kind of one of the bigger retro YouTubers. He came by, and he was really blown away by the PicoGUS, and so I sent him one later, and he did a video about it. And that's probably been the biggest driver of people finding out about it instead of just random forum threads. And that's brought a whole lot of interest into the project. So yeah, meeting people, online and in person, it's been pretty amazing. And I'm constantly bouncing ideas off of other people it's like, okay, is the Pico capable of, doing this? Like, I'm trying to think an example. Like, for example, up until recently, I had no idea that it was possible to buy the wireless chip off of a Raspberry Pi Pico W independently and just put it on a board yourself. Like the PicoGUS 2.0 is, it's not the Pico, it's just the RP2040 on the board. And I designed it from the ground up. I thought that wasn't possible to do with the wireless chip, but actually it is. I found a post on the Raspberry Pi Pico subreddit. Someone did it, and I told Kevin about it. And now he has gone off, and he's designing a whole new version of his card to use this. It just a little link I posted, set off this huge hardware redesign that he was doing. And it's just sharing information in the community around these kind of retro projects has been really awesome. And likewise, Freddie, who's done the Pico Mem card, he's an amazing assembly language programmer, and he's done some amazing optimizations around how the Pico can interface with the ISA bus and be a lot faster. So I've taken some of his ideas on how to do that and speed up the card and make it work on more temperamental systems. Like the original IBM 5150 is actually the hardest computer I've ever had to interface with. It's very uncompromising in terms of its bus timing. So yeah, it's been really great to share, and our ideas, and pollinating little ideas, and it's just really cool.
Who, when you started in the space, maybe some of the people that you met along the way, like Kevin and others, who do you follow that can who do you strive to not necessarily be like, but like, who makes you want to get better at what you do?
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you look at the back of the PicoGUS, like, there's a whole list of names. I have a whole bunch of names on it, and to be on that list, it's not just people I've talked to directly. It's people I've gotten inspiration from. It's people that said one sentence to me that made me think about things in a whole different way. Like, for example, the name Tom Seven is on there. Tom Seven, Tom Murphy the Seventh. He's I would say he's a YouTuber. He doesn't come out with very many YouTube videos, but the videos he has are really interesting, and he has a very interesting way of looking at things. And he had this one video about reverse emulating the Nintendo Entertainment System, where he basically put a Raspberry Pi instead of an NES and made the NES just display just wherever on the screen, like that stuff that was completely impossible to do on a regular Nintendo cartridge. And he called it like an example of an improper hierarchy, in terms of like you're plugging this thing that's way more powerful than the thing you're plugging it into, and which is sort of what like the PicoGUS is. It's not as big of a difference as, you know, a Nintendo 6502 and a 1 gigahertz Raspberry Pi, but you know it's still along that. That was really inspiring to me. And the stuff he makes. He's like, I want to make a a bicycle that I can hop on with one foot to get it to go. And he's been a real inspiration to me. Just oddball things and hardware hacking and just making the stuff with your hands kind of basis. And a few other people, like Cloud Schwartz, who did the PyStorm project. You know, what I was talking about, you know, putting a Raspberry Pi in to emulate the CPU of an Amiga. Like he showed like just what was like the level of things you can do by plugging in modern hardware into an old system, and the capabilities, the extra capabilities that you can give it to. And also, I would say Foon, who I followed on Twitter, and also I think she also posts on Tumblr, about like just doing weird stuff with hardware. And that's where I got the idea to use those level shifters in the very beginning. Like I saw Foon post about this one Texas Instruments part. It's like, you know, if I had the time, I would just make an ISA card with these level shifters on, and you could do anything. And like that idea kind of germinated in my head. I don't even know when it was posted, but like that idea, it germinated in my head forever. And like, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Just a little nugget that you get from someone, you know, it kind of pays off in big ways later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the last questions I've got for you is more along the lines of, I wouldn't necessarily say critics, but there are specific people who just ask why.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why do all this? Why go to the effort? Why focus on the hardware when you've got really good, you know, GUS support in DOSBox?
Mm-hmm.
You've got all of the games in there. You've got all those things. If you're really looking for original hardware, then what is plugging in a Pico into a, you know, an old 486 or a Pentium class machine? What does that do? What are your thoughts?
It's kind of funny. Like I almost kind of consider myself a real hardware purist, yet I'm developing an emulation project. Like I know there's people that are like super into like the Mister project, where like you can emulate or not emulate just about anything on this FPGA board. It's like, no, that's not very interesting to me. Like I like limitations. Like I like the limitations of having an old chunk of hardware on my desk and what you can do with it. So yeah, it's kind of funny. I feel a little bit like a hypocrite doing this, but like I tried to ask myself, it's like, if I was not the person that made this, would I want to buy one myself? And like it's kind of funny. Like it's like, where do you draw the line? Like for example, like I'm into some Commodore 64 stuff, and the floppy drives are really unreliable, or you have to align them and do all this tinkering with them. Or you can just emulate the floppy drive with the Pi 1541 project, and I did that. Like, so it's like, it feels like I don't want to emulate the whole computer. I just like want to emulate little parts of it that you can use in it, like that make your life a lot easier. Or like for example, like a flash cart on an old game console, or like a GoTech in a PC or an Amiga, like so you don't have to deal with the limitations of old physical media. Or like another example is like the Roland MT32 MIDI module. There's the Pi, you know, what are they called? MT. Trying to remember what that project's called. Um, where you can emulate it on a Pi. You plug it in with there's a hat you can plug into it that has MIDI ports on it. MT32 Pi. Okay, yeah, MT32, the MT32 Pi project. If I didn't already have an MT32 that I lucked into finding an amazing deal on, I probably would have gotten one of those. So I guess I'm not exactly a hypocrite. Like when I think about it that way, it's like I want to use the actual real computer, but like I'm okay plugging in, a something to emulate one of its peripherals to make life a lot easier, or to get around the fact that some hardware is just hard to find, or it's too expensive to get on eBay if you're willing to deal with the market.
Yeah. No, I'm right there with you. I think it's funny you mentioned where's the line? I think it's different for
Mm-hmm.
everybody, right?
Yeah.
When I was working on my battery, I had so many people be like, "Oh, well, you should put in USB-C charging." I was like, "No,
Oh.
that is the line for me." I don't know why, but but I can't tell you.
Yeah.
I'm using
It is.
modern
Yeah.
cells. I'm using an AT Tiny to emulate an entire IC, but for some
Uh huh.
reason, USB-C charging was the line. Why am I against that? It would be super convenient. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, but yeah, that was it for me.
Yeah.
But you're right. I got a Dreamcast up there, with the SD card,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly.
it's funny. I used the floppy emu for a long time, and
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't. I had a problem with it, with how it looked. So I'm
Oh,
not sure if you've seen this one, but I ended up building it into a broken
yeah. I saw
Apple
that.
Disc
Yeah.
too. It's still
Right.
a floppy emu. There's nothing different about it. It
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I think it's different for all of us. That kind of thing gives me more, I don't know, more of an accepting attitude, I think, to others that
Mm-hmm.
just want to run stuff in Dotbox,
Right.
or to say, I just like my 486 the way it is. I don't want to put anything modern into it.
Mm-hmm.
I think gatekeeping of any kind in our hobby, or in our community is just, I don't know that there's any use for it.
Oh yeah.
It's what people like. It's what they're comfortable with.
Absolutely.
We're certainly not doing this for the money. We're not getting rich off these things. At
Exactly.
least I'm not. But if somebody doesn't want to use it, then that's
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. It's like I kind of wanted to be like the anti gatekeeper for the Gravis Ultrasound. I wanted more people to use it that wouldn't have been able to use it otherwise, and kind of get the experience as close as possible to actually using one. And so, yeah, that's why I strove so hard to make it as cheap as possible to make, as easy to use, um, and open up that world to people that wouldn't have been able to have done it otherwise. Or yeah, if someone, and like I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, like a lot of the core of the emulations, not just the GUS emulation, but like like the MPU 401 emulation that's you can also load on the GUS. That's also from the DOSBox project. That play like DOSBox and MAME, PCEM, or 86 box. Like like they're incredible resources, and like I'm definitely leaning on those as much as possible, and kind of taking that kind of open source aspect as far as possible.
Well, I think I can speak for most of the community when I say we're glad you did. We're glad you took that on. You took on the project, and it's
Cool.
a great card, and it's really unlocked a lot of nostalgic memories for me, which is why I got into this whole
Yeah.
thing in the first place. So awesome
Well, thank you.
project, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for those kind words. And yeah, that's why I've done it. Yeah, is to give people that either to get to experience it again, after decades, or to kind of see what all the fuss was about, back in the day. They always heard about, the GUS, or they heard about, or like, for example, some people are getting the card just to use the MIDI support on it, to use the MPU 401 intelligent mode. It's like, I always heard about how amazing these MIDI soundtracks were on these games. I didn't ever get to play them, back when they were new. Now I can, because I can, put all this stuff together. Like they have the PicoGUS plugged into their PC, and then they have an MT32 Pi plugged into the PicoGUS to emulate the MT32. And it's like, a way to kind of bring that in and actually get to experience it.
Awesome. Well, we're all looking forward to the next projects. Want to thank you for taking the time to chat today. And where can people find you? You want to drop your social links, or where are you at these days?
Yeah, kind of like the jumping off point for PicoGUS itself. I've got a GitHub, github.com/polpo/PicoGUS, or on my personal domain, polpo.org. That's POLPO. It's the Italian word for octopus. It's based off an old handle I used to use, polpo.org/PicoGUS. I'm on Mastodon. Mastodon server I'm on is called bitbang.social /@polpo. Or yeah, you can just Google PicoGUS. It's kind of amazing, like what's out there and what people post about it. And yeah, you can probably find just stuff from Googling PicoGUS. It's pretty amazing.
All right, Ian, Scott, thanks again for joining us. And for everybody else watching, this was the first session of Makers, and hopefully one of many. And so we'll see you on the next one. If you want to see more of these, you can like and subscribe to get updates and notifications when new ones come out. Also, don't forget to support me on Patreon if you like what I do. Every dollar goes to new projects, to kind of equipment for the studio and things like that. So if you like what I do, if you like how I do it, any of that stuff, your support means quite a lot. Thanks again.